Hi everyone, it's Created by Lottie here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to be sharing 10 of my top tips for painting stained glass. This is perfect if you're a complete beginner or simply someone looking to improve your painting technique. I'll be working on this wonderful Astarion here who will be modelling for me, and I will be using Pebeo Vitrea 160 glass paints. They're my absolute favourite paints to use and my go-to every time. So let's dive straight into it with tip number 1, your workspace. Don't panic when you see me pull out this giant frame and a projector attached to it. I don't use this all the time and I only pull it out for the more complicated projects. Prior to this, I would just use a light box all the time, and I still use my light box now. I just find my projector makes it slightly easier when I'm working with really opaque glass. This is me using my light box on a different project. With a light box, I'll map out where each point is going to be on the glass, and then I'll use the template to work out where all the details are supposed to sit. You don't need a massive light box either, you only need enough space for the individual piece that you're working on. I'll link the light box below that I use. Tip number 2, finding the right brush. So finding the right brush can make a huge difference in your painting process. Over the years, I've experimented with so many different types: water reservoir brushes, nail art brushes, and too many more to count. Eventually, I discovered that model painting brushes work best for me. I prefer working with really small brushes, and these are just the perfect size and thickness for the level of detail I need. It might take a bit of trial and error to find the brushes that suit your style, and that's okay. It took me about 2 years to find these brushes, so don't hesitate to explore different options and experiment. Trust me, it is worth the effort. Tip number 3, mixing your paint. Pebeo Vitrea doesn't come with the widest range of colours, and I usually want really specific shades, like the shade of grey I wanted for Astarion's eyebrow, so I often mix my own. Just a word of caution, make sure you don't overmix the paint. Try to mix the paint together fairly gently, because if not, it can introduce tiny little bubbles into it, which then set and dry. And I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's an easier thing to avoid. Tip number 4. Using paint instead of solder. So I almost always patina my pieces in black. It's just a personal preference, I really like the way the black lines look. And I use paint to mimic the effect of a copper overlay. If you're not sure what a copper overlay is, don't worry, I've got you. This example here shows when I use copper foil over a sheet of glass, and I used a Stanley knife to cut the foil into the correct shapes that I wanted it to, went over the top of it with solder, and then it mimics the solder lines so it looks like they're all individual pieces of glass, but really it's just one piece of glass. Now, it's a beautiful technique, but I did not fancy doing it for every single ruffle on his shirt. Because honestly, I think the paint gives an almost identical effect when you're viewing the whole sun catcher from a distance. That said, on darker glass, the black paint doesn't always show up great, so in those cases I will usually always use a copper overlay instead. Tip 5, thick paint application. When it comes to painting blocks of colour, I prefer to use really thick layers of paint. I really just dollop it on there. While using this technique, it can occasionally cause the paint to concave, especially with the white-based pigments. But for me, I find I prefer to deal with a concaved paint rather than dealing with brush strokes that get left behind from painting multiple thinner layers of paint. Plus, the thicker paint tends to self-level, meaning it can have a super smooth finish overall. Though, if you know a way to avoid brush strokes or concaved paint when using Pebeo, please drop me a comment because I'd love to know. Number 6, be cautious of the copper foil. So this is a quick and really simple tip. And basically, when you use copper foil, be mindful when painting near the edges of the piece. The paint won't affect the foil adhering to the glass, but you'll want to extend your painted areas by a few millimeters just to make sure the copper foil doesn't cover up your design. With Astarion's face here, I just made sure all the points of his lips and his nose were just a few millimeters elongated so the copper foil wouldn't cover everything up. Number 7, fixing your mistake. So you just messed up. What do you do? Honestly, most of the time I just leave it. I try my best to take a Bob Ross approach and turn any mistakes into creative opportunities. For example, on Astarion's collar, I had the paint too thick on my brush and I was painting at a weird angle so it blobbed out and didn't look right. Rather than rub it off and start again, I decided to just add some thickness to the line, and in the end I actually preferred it that way. That being said, I definitely don't keep in every mistake I make, and the great thing about painting on glass, especially with Pebeo paint, is it's so easy to remove. Even if you've left it dry for a few days, you can still remove it. After you've cured it, it is possible to remove, but it's much harder and you do run the risk of scratching your glass. Tip number 8, make sure to keep your brushes clean. So a Pebeo Vitrea dries super quickly and the dried paint causes a build-up on your brush, leaving a plasticky, horrible mess. This stops your brush from picking up fresh paint, which is so frustrating. And to avoid this, it's so simple, just regularly clean your brush. I do this off camera because it's not very great to look at, but I just dip the brush in some water and wipe any excess paint onto a paper towel, but being gentle enough so that I don't damage any of the bristles. Tip 9, baking your glass. Pebeo recommend you bake your glass after letting it dry for 24 hours at 160 degrees centigrade or 325 degrees Fahrenheit. This is all in a domestic home standard oven, but I do suggest doing a few test runs first to find your oven's sweet spot, as temperatures can vary. For example, my own oven runs quite hot, so I bake my pieces for 35 minutes at 150 degrees centigrade, and that works perfectly for me. Tip 10. Well, not really a tip, but have fun and experiment. Painting stained glass is such a creative, expressive and relaxing activity, so don't stress too much about perfectionism, and I'm preaching to the choir here because I'm the worst at doing that. But with time and practice, you'll develop your own styles and techniques, and everything you produce will be stunning. I have faith in you. And they are my 10 top tips for painting with Pebeo Vitrea glass paint. There's so many P's in that. I hope these tips help you feel more confident and inspired to paint some of your own stained glass pieces. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any future tutorials. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or share your own tips because I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching and happy painting. See you next time.